Hello, thank you for watching this video. My name's Geraldine Miners and I'm the chair of the ADHD Parent Support Group for West Glasgow. And in this presentation we're going to share with you some information about ADHD and school that we used at a workshop in Scotstoun in August 2016. If you'd been at that workshop you would have heard the parents there exchanging ideas and sharing their hopes and their anxieties about their children with ADHD and school. And watching a video like this is no substitute for having been at the workshop, but we do hope to put across some useful information that can help you with your children. If you're interested in finding out more about our group, please visit our website at www.adhdglasgow.org. So the start of a new school year can be a really exciting time, but it can also be a very anxious time for children with ADHD and their families. So in this workshop, we're going to be talking about four things. First of all, why do children with ADHD often find school such a challenging environment to be in? Secondly, what do we as parents need to know about the strategies which teachers can use in school that will help? Thirdly, what can we expect from education services in Scotland? What are our legal rights as parents and what rights do our children have? And fourthly, we'll be sharing some top tips for better interactions, better meetings and conversations with our children's teachers. So why do children with ADHD often find school such a challenging place? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, so it's a condition that affects the structure and the development of the human brain, and it has these three core symptoms, and I think it's worth revisiting these symptoms because all three of them have a very profound effect on how children manage at school. So the first core symptom of ADHD is inattention, and that means difficulty with concentration and focus and having quite a poor short-term memory. The second core symptom of ADHD is impulsiveness. So that means speaking or acting without really thinking about it, coming straight out with things or doing things immediately without thinking of the consequences. And the third core symptom of ADHD is hyperactivity. So this constant need to move around, to fidget, to be on the go. So who does ADHD affect? Well, many academic studies from around the world show that around 1 in 20 or 5% of children have some degree of ADHD. And around 1 in 70 children have the more severe form of ADHD, which the World Health Organization would call hyperkinetic disorder. But we know that many fewer children than this have a formal diagnosis of ADHD in Scotland. In fact, at the present time, less than 1 in 200 children in Glasgow have a formal ADHD diagnosis. And one of the consequences of that is that in many schools there may only be 1 or 2 children with an ADHD diagnosis. And this obviously limits the amount of experience that teachers may have had of managing a child with a diagnosis of ADHD. ADHD is diagnosed about 4 times more commonly in boys than in girls, although some people think that girls are more likely to have attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity, and so they may not be noticed as readily. And the vast majority of children with ADHD still have symptoms into adulthood. We also know that ADHD has a big genetic component. It's strongly hereditary. So many children with ADHD will have other family members or parents who have ADHD as well. We also know that ADHD tends to come alongside some other neurodevelopmental conditions which can cause additional problems. It rarely comes on its own. So ADHD is associated with all of these other conditions here. Things like dyslexia, so problems with reading and spelling, dyscalculia, which is problems with numbers and maths, sensory difficulties, so children who are very oversensitive or undersensitive to sounds and sights, touch, smell and taste, and those things can make the classroom environment, which is very noisy and busy and distracting, very, very overwhelming for children with ADHD. Children with ADHD often also have dyspraxia, which means difficulty with motor and coordination, and that can be fine motor problems, so difficulties with things like buttons and Lego and tying shoelaces and handwriting, and gross motor problems, so problems with balance and clumsiness. ADHD is also associated with autistic spectrum disorder and Asperger's syndrome, and with tic disorder or Tourette syndrome. So this means that many children with ADHD have these other problems as well. And this kind of cocktail of difficulties can in the long run lead to some quite serious problems. Things like anxiety, depression, conduct disorder, and substance use disorder if they're not well managed. And that's why managing children with ADHD well at school and giving them a good school experience is just so important. So what does a child with ADHD look like in the classroom if you're a teacher? Well, if you read the books for teachers about ADHD, they highlight a number of things. Children are often out of their seat too much. They're doing something else from the rest of the class. They're losing track of tasks, struggling with tests. They can't remember what they've been told to do. They often lose things. They can be very disorganized. They may be bothering other people in the class and disrupting their work, stopping them from getting on. They can't wait their turn, they blurt things out, they don't put their hand up. They hand in work late, incomplete or not at all. They can be daydreaming, staring out of the window, seeming to be oblivious to what's going on. And because of the frustration they feel, they very often get angry and they can get into conflicts with teachers and their classmates, and that can lead to difficulty with making and keeping friends. And if they have sleep problems, and we know that sleep problems are very much associated with ADHD, then the fact that they're very tired at school can make all of these other difficulties much worse. And the risk as a result of all of this is that you end up with a kind of vicious cycle where the child has really low confidence and feels incredibly frustrated. So what can happen is they fail at tasks because of their difficulties. They get a lot of criticism and negative feedback. And the child can end up feeling really angry and humiliated because they seem to be getting told off all the time, no matter how hard they try. And they just don't want to try anymore. And then they fail further and sanctions can follow, punishments, even school exclusion. Children can end up feeling really anxious about school and very negative about school and feeling that everything is wrong with them when in fact, really what's wrong is that the whole school environment and the school system is not meeting their needs. So what strategies can teachers use in school to help? Well, one piece of good news is that many of the things that teachers can do for children with ADHD are helpful and useful for all children in the class. So they don't necessarily have to do things differently for one specific child, but they can do things which will make the environment better for everyone. And some of the basic things are structure, routine, consistent boundaries, finding activities and jobs that the individual child enjoys. So things that really interest them, things that light their fire, that will build their confidence. Making sure that children get enough physical exercise and movement during the day. So that's not just at playtime, but actually moving around in the classroom. Plenty of sleep is really important for kids with ADHD, and that's something that we as parents can help with by making sure that our children have a regular bedtime and no screen in that hour before bed. And having a healthy diet also helps. An ADHD medication, if it's been prescribed for a child, is also useful, and it's very important that schools make sure that children get their medication at lunchtime if they're on one of the versions of the medication that needs to be taken in the middle of the day. And there are lots of books for teachers about ADHD which are pretty helpful. And these are just 3 that have a UK focus, and they're all available on Amazon for very little money. So they may be good recommendations for your child's teacher or even a present for your child's teacher. And if you read these books, they list loads of different tactics for teachers that can be helpful. So these are just some of the ones that come up frequently as suggestions. First of all, it's really important to build children's confidence through encouragement and positive feedback and rewards and responsibilities that really tap into their strengths. They can often end up feeling like they're just getting negative feedback all the time, and that cycle needs to get broken. Putting the child close to the teacher and away from distractions. Warning children about transitions that are coming up and changes to routine, so things don't come as a big surprise and shock to them when they're moving from one activity to the next. Breaking tasks down into bite-sized chunks and being very specific about instructions. If you give children with ADHD 5 things to do, the chances are that when they've done the first couple, they'll have forgotten what the rest are. So presenting things one at a time or writing them down can be really helpful. Letting children move around and giving regular breaks with exercise is very useful. Allowing children to stand up, to draw, to fiddle with objects when listening can really help. Providing visual prompts and memory aids, so things like homework diaries, written instructions, visual instructions. And making sanctions consistent and immediate. And I think the end of the week is really too long for children with ADHD. If a child with ADHD does something on a Monday and the consequence is that they lose golden time, for example, on a Friday, by the time Friday comes around, they've completely forgotten what the thing was that they earned that for. So making sanctions immediate is more helpful. And here are just some examples of toys or sensory feedback devices that can be very helpful in the classroom. Children with ADHD often have this extra need for sensory feedback, and that's why they're moving around and fiddling with things all the time. So some ideas here are just having some blue tack or some science putty. Some kids with ADHD have a piece of blue tack stuck under their desk, or one half of a piece of Velcro stuck under their desk that they can just fiddle with, which doesn't need to distract anyone else. There are squeezy toys. Wobble cushions can be really great in helping children to focus and also to be less fidgety on their chairs. Things like TheraBand, elastic. The child at the bottom there in the middle is doing a chair press up. So that's something that children with ADHD can do without having to ask to leave the classroom. If they're feeling really agitated, they can just push up on their chair seat and do a big chair press up, and that can help them to refocus. And anything involving deep pressure, pushing off walls, all of that kind of thing can help. And if you have an occupational therapist within the team that works with your child, occupational therapists are very helpful at suggesting these kind of things too. These are just some examples of visual reward and discipline systems that you can have in the classroom. And one of the things that we talked about at the workshop was the fact that children with ADHD can often get very anxious and sometimes have meltdowns in the classroom. And so having some kind of quiet zone where they can go to calm down, to get away from all of that sensory stimulation can be very helpful. Some of the parents in the group talked about the fact that their schools have tents or nurture rooms where kids can go, or even just a beanbag and some cushions in the corner of the classroom can be a good place for kids to go and settle. So the next part of this presentation is about what we can expect from education services in Scotland. And I'm not going into a huge amount of detail here, but at the end of this part, there are some references and links to where you can go to get more information. So the Education Act for Scotland, Additional Support for Learning, which was passed in 2004, spells out how children with additional support needs should be supported by the education system. So this is put into law, and additional support needs are defined very broadly. They can be for many different reasons, including social and emotional difficulties, being very gifted, having a physical disability, a learning disability, problems at home, and looked after children are all defined as having additional support needs. So there are all kinds of reasons why kids may have ASNs, and that would definitely include having ADHD. This wheel diagram is from Getting It Right for Every Child, GERFEC, which is the Scottish national programme to improve outcomes for all Scottish children and make Scotland the best place in the world for children to grow up. So you will see these elements across many different aspects of education, health, and social services. They're known as the Shinari indicators because if you put together the initials of these different elements, safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible, and included, it spells out Shinari. And the aim of the curriculum for excellence is to help children to do the best that they can on all 8 indicators. And when we had our workshop, there was some agreement in the group that these are very useful ways of thinking about how our children are doing. It can be very useful for us when we're thinking about how our children are doing at school and at home to just run through these different elements. And it may well be that children are doing well on some aspects and less well on others. And that can help us to prioritise what we should be doing, what our children's schools should be doing that can help our children. So the Education Act for Scotland says that you have a right to ask your educational authority for a number of different assessments for your child. So first of all, you have a right to ask your education authority to find out whether your child has an additional support need like ADHD or dyslexia or any of these other things. And once they've been assessed and it's been found that they have got an additional support need like ADHD, as parents, we also have the right to ask for a specific assessment about how those needs should be met and to receive information and advice about our children's additional support needs. And the assessment can come in a number of different ways. So it might be by an educational psychologist or another kind of psychologist. It might be a health assessment, a social work assessment, or some kind of specialist assessment, which might be done by a voluntary sector agency. But if you feel that your child's needs haven't been properly assessed, you can ask the school in the first instance. And if that doesn't work, you can go to the local educational authority. And the advice is to put it in a letter or an email or some other form that you can keep a record of and a copy of. And once your child's additional support needs have been assessed, then there are a number of different types of additional support which might be put in place. And there's no automatic right to any of these. So it's not the case that if you have ADHD, you will get this, this, and this. It's very much a question of the school putting in place, using the resources that they have, whatever it is that your individual child needs. But these are just the types of things that they might well do. So they may adapt the curriculum, so break work down into smaller chunks, offer work in different formats, allow children to use computers or laptops, particularly if they find handwriting difficult. They may offer individual or small group teaching or group work support, like nurture groups. There may be some specific individual support for your child from a classroom assistant or additional support needs assistant or behaviour coordinator. They may offer peer support, like buddying your child up with another child. And often children with ADHD get a great deal of benefit from being able to help another child, perhaps a younger child, as well as being buddied up with an older child to help them. It may be that the teacher can get some specialist advice on how to manage the child best. There may be therapy available within school, like a speech and language therapist, for example. And children may end up attending a special unit within a school or even a special school if their needs warrant it. So whatever support is put in place should be written down in a plan. And there are 3 main types of plan that children have within the education system in Scotland. So at the most basic level, there's a personal learning plan, which spells out the aims and goals that your child has that relate to their circumstances and what support they'll get that will help them to achieve those aims. The next level is that children may get an individualised educational programme which spells out their strengths and skills and their additional support needs and how those needs will be met. And that should include specific learning outcomes and details of who will be involved, including the role that parents and home will play in supporting the child. And then the third kind of plan that children may have is called a coordinated support plan. And this is actually a formal legal document which is generally used for children who've got complex or multiple needs and often have input going on from a number of different agencies. So it will describe how, for example, health, social work and education will work together. And there's always a named CSP, Coordinated Support Plan coordinator, in that document. But the key thing about all of these plans is that you and your child should be fully involved in developing the plan. If you haven't been involved and you haven't had an input and an opportunity to comment and to sign the plan, then that's not good enough. And secondly, there should be regular reviews to see if the plan is working and to make changes if necessary. There's lots more information out there about your legal rights as a parent and about what the education services should be providing. And these are two sources of information. So the good first port of call is Inquire. They have a website at www.inquire.org.uk and a helpline. And they're the Scottish Government service which provides information on additional support for learning. They've got a huge number of fact sheets and advice that can be super helpful. And secondly, I've put down here the Education Law Unit at Govan Law Centre. This is a free national advocacy service which supports families who have a right of appeal to the Additional Support Needs Tribunal for Scotland. And they can help with things like refusal of placement requests. So Inquire is the first place to go for information. But ultimately, if you don't feel that your child's needs are being met, you do have the right to seek legal advice about that, and Govan Law Centre is the place to go. Last of all, here are some top tips for better interactions with teachers. So the first tip would be proactive. Arrange a time to go and see your child's teacher right at the start of the year if you can. Before there's a problem, it's much better if the first conversation we have with our children's teachers is a positive one, not when there's been some kind of crisis at school and we get hauled in to talk about it. Secondly, it's a really good idea before you meet your child's teacher to make a list of your top concerns and your positive suggestions for what would help your child. You are the expert on your child. You know more about them than anyone else does, and they'll be really pleased to hear about your experience and to know what you think would help. Thirdly, it's a good idea to find out how much your child's teacher knows about your child's diagnosis and history, particularly if your child has a new teacher. I think it's easy for us to assume that information gets passed seamlessly around between different parts of schools, but we know that that's often not the case, so it's a good idea to find out what they already know. Take along any reports that you've had, for example, from the CAMS team when you meet with them, because it can help to put them in the picture. It's also really important to show respect and empathy for our children's teachers. They have a really difficult job. They have large classes to deal with, and our children can be very challenging, as we know. So let them know that you're on their side and that you want to build a positive relationship with them. If your child has several teachers, and this particularly applies in secondary school, it's a good idea to talk about how the lead teacher that you may meet with is going to pass information to and from other teachers so that everybody that interacts with your child understands their diagnosis and understands the strategies that are going to help them. And lastly, it's a good idea to agree how you're going to keep in touch with each other. Can you email the teacher, for example? Can they email you? Can you meet every few weeks to discuss progress? Can you have a homeschool notebook that is kept in your child's bag that you can pass back and forth? So thank you very much indeed for watching this video. In summary, school can be a challenge for children with ADHD, but your support will really help them to overcome their anxieties and to get the best from school. Don't underestimate what you can do to help your child do better. Approach your child's school positively and proactively, and know your rights. The Inquire website and helpline is a really great resource. Finally, if you'd like a copy of the handouts from this presentation, then please contact us via our website at adhdglasgow.org. And if you live in Glasgow, then please consider joining our group and coming along to one of our meetings, and then we can meet and support you face to face.